Olá, eu sou Lisiane Feiten Wingert Ody e sou professora na Faculdade de Direito da UFRGS. É com muita alegria que eu trago para compartilhar com vocês hoje uma entrevista que realizei com a professora doutora Scafidi, da Universidade de Fordham, em Nova York. A professora Scafidi não apenas é líder, uma das líderes em propriedade intelectual no mundo, mas a fundadora da área de Fashion Law. E eu pude conhecê-la no evento, no 21º Oxford IP Moot da Universidade de Oxford, em que ela foi a palestrante convidada. Sem me estender muito mais, eu passo a vocês a palavra da professora Scafidi sobre temas recentes e importantes da área dos contratos envolvendo propriedade intelectual e o mundo da moda. Bom proveito!
Hello, we are very happy to present you Professor Scafidi. We are great admirers of your work and we are very thankful for you sharing all your knowledge with us, especially in Brazil.
Well, hopefully not all of it yet. Hopefully I have a few more things.
Of course, always. Every time I hear you or I read your papers, I learn a lot. It's a great experience all the time, because I was even telling the other students outside of the room that you have your way to put things in a very sensitive manner. So you are not like preaching to other people. It's not aggressive. You allow us to share your knowledge. You allow us to have our own reflections on the matter that you present. And I think it's a lovely way to engage students and even to persuade people to believe in things that you believe, because you are not like passing judgment. You just, for example, when you talk about cultural appropriation, you talk about respect, you talk about knowledge. And I think this is very, not only reasonable, but very appropriate to engage people in this matter. Because sometimes people do not think about and they really use things from another culture, like a costume, as you said.
Of course.
And I think that the way that you present, as you did today, are really very effective in a very nice way. So I'm really a great admirer, and I'm very, very thankful to have this opportunity. I think it's lovely that you are so generous.
That is so very kind. But for me, this is marvelous because I am today in a space with you and with our students where everyone believes in the same project. And you know, that for me was the story of creating fashion law. I could have gone to my office, closed my door, written high academic books, and never created a community. But that doesn't create a new field. That just creates some books that will be on a library shelf forever. So that sort of approach to engaging conversation not only creates community, creates a field, but also outside of the field brings in the community and can change the culture in the world. So step by step, there's a reason for that approach.
Yeah, it's so true. That's so true. And another big truth, the things that you said tonight, is that in order to talk about fashion law, you have to know the business. You have to know fashion.
Yes.
And that's why it's also so convincing when you speak, when you present the subjects and bring the issues to reflection, because we can realize that you know deeply the content that you are present. So
it is important though, and I think not only in fashion, but in every industry. If you don't understand the business of fashion or the business of that industry, you can't understand the industry. It's honestly, I think, how Diane van Furstenberg and I became close in that sense, because on one of my very first meetings with her, I wore one of her wrap dresses, but it was sort of a military style. It had the buttons here and here and the epaulets and the shoulders, but mine had lost a button. And so I went out and I bought new buttons for it. And I was going to buy ordinary new buttons, but instead I found these beautiful 1930s Art Deco fabulously shaped buttons, and I put those on the dress. So we were in a meeting and we're talking about law and we're talking about strategy, and she stops and everyone gets quiet and she looks at me and says, "Are those my buttons?" And I said, "Well, no, but..." And she said not one word. She got up from the table, she walked out of the room, and everyone thought, "Susan, what have you done?" And she walked
She's
back.
offended, maybe.
Exactly. She walked back with her camera, said, "I like those buttons," took a photograph, and in her next collection had a similarly shaped button.
Wonderful.
But it's a story that she has told, that I have told, because for her, that was the moment when she thought, I can talk to this lawyer because she understands my world. She understands fashion.
It's wonderful.
And I think it's for anyone, for any client you ever have, it's important that you speak their language. I have given trademark advice while being pinned into a jacket, because the designer was on deadline and needed a fit model, essentially. But it's important to come to our clients and to come to the industry with that willingness to learn and that engagement.
That's perfect, and you certainly have.
Thank you.
So,
But I think we all can.
I'm a professor in Brazil, but I teach fashion law, and I have like hundreds of students. They are absolutely passionate for the subject and for you, of course. And so I'd like to ask you a few questions in order to share the moment with them. So I do appreciate your availability, your patience with me and with our colleagues today. So first question, do you believe that should be copyright protection for fashion designs, for the fashion industry? Because some people say that it's not adequate, that it should not be appropriate because of the cycling and the times, because you have to have 6 collections per year. So it's a very difficult subject.
I do believe we need some additional protection for fashion. Does it need to be full copyright, international standard minimum life of the author plus 50 years? In many places, the US life plus 70. Probably not, right? Probably not that long. But a short period of protection allows designers to recover their investment rather than just having copies sold instead, and enables them to continue and grow. And I think it's especially important for emerging designers because the big brands can hide behind their trademarks to an extent. The smaller brands, when they are copied, their trademarks are not even copied typically. And so they have no protection at all. And so, yes, I do think it is quite important that we have some international standard minimum protection that also applies to fashion, because that's the way, as in other industries, the industry can continue to grow, evolve, progress.
And it's amazing that we don't have such protection, since fashion is the major industry, even bigger than sports and entertainment. The second question is it recommendable to offer protection for unregistered design? Because we are here in the Moot, and the Moot problem this year was exactly around this question. The unregistered design, we don't have such thing in Brazil, but Europe has for a few years already. So in your opinion, should we have it? Or?
Yes, when I spent some time in the US Congress drafting and redrafting and redrafting over a period of 4 Congresses a proposal to extend protection for fashion, ultimately we had started by thinking it ought to be registered, but ended up in the final version, which alas did not pass, but maybe one day, with unregistered protection. Part of the reason for that is that registration costs money to administer from the government perspective. So it was a practical reason, right? We didn't want Congress to feel forced to appropriate money for this because they might be less likely to pass. But also from an equitable perspective, it is certainly true that if we were to pass registered protection, sophisticated companies and entities would know that they needed to register, but the small designers, the unsophisticated ones, would not, or maybe would not have the money in addition to the expertise to do so. So I do think that unregistered protection makes the most sense, much the way we have unregistered copyright protection. And I think that were we to institute that, it would not be the case that people would be caught unawares. The copyists would, with all the best intentions, copy and be caught because they didn't know that they couldn't copy. Because most of the industry is not small, but it is interconnected. And copyists tend to be repeat players, as do creatives. And so if we were to pass unregistered protection in the US, in Brazil, anywhere, I think the industry would very quickly adapt. If we were to have 6 copyists, right, who with no protection, they can all make line for line, stitch for stitch copies of whatever is on the runway or on the red carpet. If we have 6 copyists and there is protection, they each have to make some changes. So we force innovation even for those who are attempting to follow trends rather than fully innovate. So I think there's so many benefits on both sides.
Yes, and it's just talk about something that makes me realize that we have another very difficult thing in fashion, that sometimes copying is not really a copy, but following a tendency. And people talk about, oh, this is tendency. This is not really a copy. Do you have any opinion about a criteria that we can use to distinguish this?
I do. In determining what is merely following a trend, and I'm in favor of trends. If purple dresses are suddenly in fashion, then everyone needs to buy a purple dress, and that's good for the industry. Maybe not the same purple dress, but some purple dress. Right? So trends actually are a good thing. But to distinguish between following trends and copying, we need to have a standard of infringement that makes that distinction. So in copyright, of course, we use substantial similarity all the time. When we were drafting, for fashion, we went back and forth. That was probably the most contentious provision that we attempted to create. We came up with substantial identicality. So a copy would have to be substantially identical to the original. Not absolutely identical, because then any tiny little change, even a change that would make something less expensive to create, right? Maybe ruching instead of pleating or something. But substantially identical, so that we have something that is within this range of fashion, very close, but not only protect that which is exactly identical. So yes, I do think we need to have a heightened standard, and a heightened standard of what we protect. You know, I remember sitting on a panel once with someone who had been the head of a trade association called the American Apparel and Footwear Association. And a question came from the audience, and someone said, well, of what goes down the runway every season, how much would be protected? And she and I both, without looking at each other, we said 10%. Right? Because not everything needs protection. Not everything is sufficiently original to get protection. Sometimes you have a wildly creative jacket, but you just need an ordinary pair of trousers to go with it, because you don't want your model to walk without trousers. So you know, I think that there's a way to make protection quite reasonable in a way that it works for the industry.
Perfect.
So now in another environment, in the garden, we are enjoying the nice weather. And I just would like to ask you about your ideas about copyright protection of traditional knowledge.
Of course. So traditional knowledge or traditional cultural expressions are another of the fields of human creativity that don't fit well in the context of intellectual property. We think about the individual genius, right? The author or the inventor in the garage. We don't think about communities who create and create over generations. And so because of that poor fit, all of this wonderful creativity gets left out of our system, of our legal system. meaning that those communities don't get the chance to benefit from all of the work that they do. And some of them don't even think in those kinds of property terms, but they do think in terms of protecting their identities, protecting their heritage. So for all of those reasons, I think it's quite important, whether it's for economic reasons, or psychological reasons, or sociological reasons. It's very important to think about protecting those things, but to think about protecting them in ways that respect the communities themselves, but also respect the fact that no one wants to be limited only to their own culture. Humanity is a beautiful thing, right? We borrow from one another, we share from one another, we eat fusion cuisines, right? And so the important thing about protecting traditional cultural expressions is to find a balance between protecting the source communities and their work, but also being able to continue to have exchange. So, no single individual can know everything about every community in the world and what is and is not appropriate. So, because no individual can know everything about every community in the world and what is and isn't appropriate to borrow, in synthesizing my research, what I ultimately came up with is a rule of 3 S's. So as you know, my name is Susan Scafidi. When you're born alliterative, you become fond of your initial. My initial is an S. So the thing that I ask creators to think about is, first off, consider the source. Is the source community someone or something that has been historically oppressed and is still suffering from some of the discrimination it has experienced? If we're dealing with that kind of source community, be more cautious. The second S is that significance. How significant is what you are borrowing to the source community? Is it something that is very important, maybe even sacred or secret, limited to only certain members of the community? If so, again, proceed with greater caution, as opposed to something that is freely shared and commodified that might be more appropriate to borrow. And finally, the final S is similarity. How similar is what you are creating to the original? Is it a line for line, stitch for stitch, beat for beat copy? If so, maybe exercise a little more creativity. Or is it just a colorway or a silhouette or a feeling or a flavor? If so, then maybe it might be more appropriate to borrow and to incorporate into the other creative things that you do. So that's the way I would approach the issue. The thing about cultural appropriation is there's so very little black letter law on the subject. Little tiny bits in some countries and not even all countries. So a lot of what we do has to be, as we said before, persuasive rather than dictatorial. If we can persuade people that everyone in the world has a culture, including those who would appropriate, and everyone wants their cultures respected, then we get a lot further than trying to preach or dictate.
Perfect. I'm so thankful. And do you think there's something trendy in fashion law now? Just to finish?
A trendy issue or subject? Oh my goodness. Let me think for a moment. There are so many, right? I think that the question of design protection is still being worked out. The question of parity is really not worked out yet. And so I think we'll see a lot more of that. In the U.S., we are having an issue that is not an intellectual property issue, but having to do with the anti-drag laws, right? So some 20-some U.S. states out of 50 have passed laws forbidding men to perform in the clothing of women or women in the clothing of men. And knowing Brazil, knowing Carnival, I know that would shut down a lot of things. Just as in the U.S., it is frightening a lot of performers, affecting a lot of livelihoods. So in the fashion law space, more generally, that's something we're having to address.
That's really nice. I'm so thankful. Thank you very much for your patience, for your time, for the availability. As I said, I'm a true admirer. I think now that I personally met you, and I can tell you're a true lady, and it's such an honor to meet you and to share this conversation with you.
This has been a delight for me as well. Here we're sitting in the middle of the night in Oxford. We've come halfway around the world to have this beautiful conversation. So
it was really nice. Fun. It is the best memory ever. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank Julia, who is filming and who is freezing to death because Oxford in March at night is still a little bit cold. So thank you so much.
I think that since she's writing her paper in parody, it was like a gift.
It's worth every cold.
And in
to
fashion,
listen.
so it was perfect. Thank you so much. I do appreciate it.
This was fun.